Hello again, Steve here with a few comments about our coffee chat. We had a live coffee chat this evening, which is, you're probably aware, is a live discussion forum of a group of people where we discuss an idea right along the lines of improving the quality of our lives. The topic was, and I may have talked about it before, but it was about how we have, as human beings, a tendency to have down days or depressed days. So the idea was to talk about it in terms of what is it we do to help ourselves in those situations, and what can we gain from that experience. There were 12 of us there, which is a great size for having a discussion like this, because it's enough to have a diversity in discussion, diversity in ages, men and women, yet it's not too, so everybody has a chance to input, and it's not too big to distract from, to have people feeling that they're left out or whatever. Great size chat for that. And we had a lot of really good ideas, mostly had to do with things that people do to help themselves in that situation. I'll just go through a few of them that popped out. Somebody said they use art to help them, and color. Somebody said they like to go outside. A few people said that, go out and watch the river. Somebody said doing photography, driving out in the middle of nowhere, have a look around, making a gratitude list, listening to music, change what we're doing, read positive thoughts, being physically active, sitting meditation with no thought, listen to music again, some sort of a distraction, change of thought and perspective, physical exercise, going out in nature, aerobic exercise, gratitude list, once again, somebody else said that. Somebody said going shopping, walking during shopping and seeing other people, calling a friend, letting time pass. A lot of times that lets it go, and letting it flow. And somebody said that these sort of things can be seasonal, and once the season changes, away it goes. Somebody else said picture where we want to be, set a goal, and consider what it is that might have brought us down. And then there was general discussion. People were putting in ideas. Somebody said we don't get trained on how to cope with this. Somebody said that spirituality helps some people. I made the point that I had heard somewhere that, using reason, our logical sense of reason, can help us to lead to virtue or truth, which can help us to lead into happiness, and happiness helps us to melt away whatever feelings those other ones are, right? Realizing that we can't make anybody else happy. Somebody said that anger or that depression is anger held inward. I thought that was interesting. Come to know what it is that we like. Something to do with acceptance. There was a really good quote to which I didn't get a chance to write it all down. Holding a grudge is like something. Recording oneself. Somebody talked about journaling, writing out thoughts, right? Or in this case, somebody said while driving, you could actually record yourself and listen to it later. Forgiveness. Somebody talked about that. Somebody asked the question why it is that we focus more on the negative than the positive. Somebody mentioned that might be a survival mechanism. Lots of good ideas. I will do a write-up on this too. So some thoughts that I had. Let's see here now. I thought that we can learn from our down days. In my case anyways, it just helps to remind me of the importance of self-knowledge, learning about self as much as I can, and what it is that I can or can't control, or what appears that I can or can't control. That alone just lifts me up, I find. The things that I can do, these sort of times, I go for a run, I eat more healthy, tidy up the house or the car, get going in some way on a project, say. So I sometimes clean up the shop or something like that. And learning to go through what is truthful, trying to chisel down. Once again, I remember that saying, reason leads to virtue, leads to happiness. That was Stefan Molyneux said that. Now, what I learned from it is, well, what I said first was the reminder of self-knowledge, but it helps me to look for books that can be helpful. In other words, rather than just put a band-aid on it, I try to find out where the cut is. That was an analogy I used at the discussion tonight, which is that if we're feeling down in a moment or in a day, that's analogous to getting a cut on our finger. Get a cut on our finger is very important to put the band-aid on. And the band-aid for the down day would be, let's say I'm going to go out for a run, right? But that doesn't tell me why it is that I'm feeling the down day. Just like putting the band-aid on doesn't tell me how I got cut. I might have been swinging my hand, walking quickly through an area that had sharp items, cut myself. And if I didn't pay attention to that, the next time I go through, even though I had a band-aid, I cut myself somewhere else, right? So being aware, analyzing how it is that I got there can be important. And one of the things about our moods, deep-seated depressions and so on, has to do with the way we were programmed, right? Because everybody's got different moods and so on. And somebody introduced this book to me, which is Adult Children of Abusive Parents. Now this has to do with abuse in our early life. And he talks about here surviving abuse. He talks about how depression and that sort of stuff is almost like a PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Now he was quoting this Dr. Charles Whitfield, who writes, "I believe, as do others, that growing up or living in a seriously troubled or dysfunctional family or similar environment often brings about or is associated with PTSD." Now, he talks about in here about how upwards of 85% of people can be classified as having been abused in some way. He doesn't mean just getting slapped around and this sort of thing, but all sorts of abuse, like timeouts, and I don't think he mentions it here about being told superstition as truth and whatever. It's being lied to, being just bossed around without any reason for it. All sorts of different things, or just neglect, yelling, scolding, alcoholism in the family, all sorts of different things. And later on he talks about how love is so important, of course, especially for a child, and when children don't have it, children as human beings, we're very ingenious creatures, will find ways to survive, right? But those ways can show up as dysfunction then later on in life, of course. Now, he says here that for a child, the need for protection and safety is even more important than the need for love. Because obviously without protection and safety has got to come first. I mean, that's like, do I eat or do I go play with my friends? If I don't eat, I can't play with my friends. If I'm not safe and protected, I can't have love. Like there's a priority, right? So even though they yearn for love, safety and protection is going to come first, right? It's only when the child feels safe and protected that she can truly let herself love and feel loved. This need for protection is even more apparent when there is abuse and no adult to turn to for safety. So, once again, the abuse is all sorts of abuse, from very subtle to very overt, right? And the reason this is important, I think, is because in the same way that if we don't investigate the cause of getting the cut and we only put the band-aid on, then the likelihood of, if we keep doing the same things, of getting cut again are there. So the cause of the cut is still there. And it's not addressed if we only put the Band-Aid on. If we only go out for the run, if we only read the books and meditate and these sorts of things, if we only do that, the program that caused the depression or the dysfunction that's in our lives, that's up and down the yo-yo, is still going to be there. And it seems to make sense to me, and from what I've been learning, that the programs that are dumped into us over many, many years of development, especially those in our formative years, are still there. And if they're not addressed, we will continue in the same cycle of the dumper, and perhaps even deeper at times. Another thing that I read recently, and my phone's locked again here just a second, was by this guy, Paul Rosenberg. I get this email. It's an investment email, and he does a weekly column on basically liberty and freedom, this sort of thing, and he talks about a lot about the human condition because we're held back so much. And this one was about liberty, the unused cure or something like that. I won't read the whole thing, but I just thought he had some really good lines at one point here. He said, "What is it that we have?" is the question in this section of the email. And he starts out with saying, "Let me start with a question. How many personal problems do you suppose thrive on low self-esteem?" The answer, pretty clearly, is most of them. "And how many personal disasters have happened because people are afraid to use their own judgment?" That answer also, more than likely, most of them. So how many of these problems would fade away if self-esteem and judgment weren't at such abysmal levels? Yeah, most of them. The people in the huckster's pews. Now, the huckster's pews, that was earlier on in the article, but once again, it's paragraphs and paragraphs, I'd be at it forever. He started out the story about being in a church or seeing people in a church or whatever one time, and these were people who were just sitting there and just responding over and over again to whatever the preacher said. So they were basically being fed these conclusions or these assertions that were being put forward by the preacher. They weren't questioning it. It was all just taking it. And he calls, in this case, the preacher a huckster because the preacher probably has no foundational evidence that what he's saying has any correctness to it. So anybody who's selling that as truth but doesn't have evidence of it, that's sort of his definition of a huckster, right? So anyways, so the people in the huckster's pews were these people in the church. And use them as an example of people who are just being fed a bunch of stuff and not questioning, not making their own judgment for it, right? So the people in the huckster's pews were trained to believe that their role in life was to fear and obey, not to imagine, judge, and opine. They had their wills crushed by hierarchy and its institutions. They were confused by smooth-talking people in expensive suits. They were intimidated by people in uniforms. They were repeatedly shamed. They were taught to bow to the idols of authority. Those are the sources of their problems, and they are precisely the things that real applied liberty chops up. We've been slow to see it, but the people who freaked out knew. Healthy, free, confident people do not reflexly obey, and such people are an existential threat to their system. Rulership requires its subjects to be confused, insecure, and ashamed, and that requirement is sickening millions of souls. We hold the cure in our hands. We should take it seriously. I like the line Rulership requires its subjects to be confused, insecure, and ashamed. This cuts very deep to most of us. I hope we can see it, because it cuts right into the heart of our families for the most part. We were governed by rulership from the very beginning, by people we looked up to as gods, as know-it-alls, but who, with all good intentions, but we all know what the road to hell is paid for very often, right? The old saying goes. But we ended up confused, insecure, and ashamed very often. Ashamed of ourselves, ashamed of our identity, ashamed of our families. I was. And fed a lot of superstition and lies. And I think the saying, reason leads to virtue, leads to happiness, is an extremely important one. Because now one of the values of being in those valleys of down days and depressed, I would say, is that that's where the innovation comes from. Innovation and also inspiration for what it is that we want, right? Because life is a dichotomy of what we want and what we don't want all the time, right? And if we're in the state of what we don't want, we can see more clearly what we want, right? If we're feeling like shit, we want to feel happy, right? So it gives us that example of that moment of reflection, and if we're aware of it, we can capitalize on that and begin to ask ourselves, and this is what works for me, reason. What is reason? Reason is one of the things about reason is asking why. What's the reason, right? It's an investigation, and it can be a logical investigation. That's often what we mean when we say somebody is reasonable or somebody's using reason. It's like using a logical system of critical thinking. And if we realize that one of the reasons we're feeling down is just because of a bunch of nonsense going on in our heads, then we see that as the truth, as the virtue. Like virtue is essentially a synonym for truth, right? What's our truth? What is the truth of this? I mean, if we're fearful about something, and it's something legitimate, if we're out camping somewhere and there's a bear lurking around, that's a legitimate fear. They come rummaging through the camp and step on our heads or something, or sit on our heads, or worse. But if it's just something that's just rolling around, it's a bunch of nonsense, and worrying about an ex-boyfriend 5 years ago or something, or a girlfriend, or what's going to happen in 2 years with my bank account, or that somebody thought something about me that was, that we didn't like. I mean, it's just a bunch of hooey that's going on in our heads. And we can say, oh, you're right. That's just a bunch of hooey. And there's something about, by asking and realizing a truth, that has a way of kind of poof, detonating the nonsense. It's like a liberation of the consciousness, and the depression we can just snap out of it, or the down day we can snap out of it. I'm not talking about something I'm not any kind of a psychologist prescribing any ideas here that are truthful. I'm just sharing ideas, right? I mean, there's people there who talk about how sometimes it's, it's chemical imbalances and stuff, and I'm not going to debate that whatsoever. Some people are in like chronic depression or whatever. I'm talking about those down days, and we all have the little dumpers, right? So, but once we can detonate that, that's when that kind of the reason equals virtue equals happiness. And it's not a happiness, a bunch of whole laughs necessarily. It's just like a good feeling inside. It's like, whoa, man. It's like all of a sudden the sun came out and it's shining. And wow, we can feel that warmth, right? I don't know what else. There was something else I wanted to share too, but it doesn't really matter. Overall, it was a great discussion, I thought. Everybody had, as far as I can see, everybody had input. I think everybody was fairly comfortable. and there was a lot of little information. A lot of information flowed from it. I'm going to make up a few notes here and post that on the website as well. Otherwise, I got to go to work in the morning. It's getting pretty late right now. I think it's I get about 5 hours of sleep hopefully, which is great. Once again, my name is Steve. Talk to you again soon. Bye bye for